Welcome one and all to Last Stop Penn Station podcast featuring Cary Silkin and Ian Riccaboni. They dive deep into Cary's wealth of stories, and no subject is off limits. From the world of wrestling to his ticket agency, growing up in New Jersey, drug-fueled underground days, hustling in the French Quarter of New Orleans, and endless days and nights in New York City, every story is worth telling.
Welcome, everyone, to another exciting edition of Last Stop Penn Station. I'm Ian Riccaboni. We are joined by as always, our guest of honor, Cary Silkin. Cary, we just got off the phone with Kevin Sullivan. What a treat it is to talk to him.
Yeah, talk about a true living legend, a true historian.
Right.
We're doing this poster of the week stuff.
Adfreeshows.com.
And it's not stuff. We're doing the poster of the week. Thank you, Conrad. And as well as the 55 and 5, and as well as our podcast. And to have, in the case of this week, one of the posters was Kevin was on the card.
He was on the card and explained a unique match type.
Right. And, here's a guy that wrestled from 1970 and is still currently in the business, working behind the scenes with, I forget the name of the company, but they're in Texas. And, Ring of Honor alumnus.
Yeah.
His credentials, and he's not only a wrestling historian. I don't know if you know this. He's an incredible baseball historian.
Yeah, that used to be my favorite part of traveling with him. I traveled briefly with him,
as well as world history. He's traveled a lot. He knows all about Roman history and British history, going back to the various periods of time, and very well read and learned guy. And to talk wrestling with him, it's like and I was earlier I said to Kevin, when are you going to write your book?
Right. Yeah, there's a guy who was at the head of the ship, WCW. Eric Bischoff gets all the credit, but the man formatting the TVs, laying out the matches,
the man who made Goldberg,
right. And the man who led the NWO to what they did.
Right.
It's incredible. He had Vince on the ropes and the WWE on the ropes. And, it's just one of the underrated people in wrestling, Kevin Sullivan.
And he has a podcast with John Paz, Two Man Power Trip. Mm-hmm. John has a podcast, I don't know how he has the time to do it, but he has 5 a week.
Yeah.
And he has Kevin on. So if you want to hear about, Kevin talks about these various eras. I think a lot of it is concentrated on the Nitro era.
Right.
Excuse me. But it's great to have Kevin as a friend. I'm glad that, he came to Ring of Honor. And I wish he would. Who knows? Maybe he'll be back.
Yeah, we have some interesting characters who we've seen each and every week, including this past week on the watch along with 2 great matches, 2 young guys, Tony Depp and LSG. It was a great match, a little kind of a final battle rematch between the two, and then we had an excellent main event. The Foundation. They said they were a little disappointed with how things went in that big 8-man brawl the week before, so they were going to have a match under their rules and set their tempo. And what's interesting to me is that there's not really a sense of who to cheer for, who is the villain, because I like what the Foundation does, but they're kind of getting under my skin a little bit about their wrestling's the right way. When me as a fan, I like the pure, I like the brawling, I like Roosh, who just throws everybody around.
And this was going back, they used to say, ooh, we're going to have a scientific match.
Right.
Which was, in the old days, would mean it was 2 good guys. Mm-hmm. And this was a 6-man match, scientific. And it was, plenty of great wrestling.
Right.
Plenty of, this was not boring.
Right.
This was, plenty of action. And you could join us for these watch parties. Every Monday, 7 o'clock Eastern time. It's free on ROH on the ROH website
and on Fight TV.
And you should definitely join Honor Club.
Absolutely.
There's so much good stuff on there.
Yeah, the archives are getting larger and larger. This week, the World 6-Man titles are on the line, Cary. SOS, Shane Taylor finally getting that shot against Mexa Squad.
That should be a brawl.
Yeah, talk about contrast to styles. Two guys over 300 pounds, and Taylor and Moses. And then you got Khan, who's just shredded, maybe 240, against three very quick but very strong Mexican stars.
Well, one of these days I'm gonna suggest to the powers that be to do a lights out.
A lights out.
Have we ever done a lights out?
Yes, actually.
Oh,
Kevin Steen and Cliff Compton.
Okay.
Yeah, in non-sanctioned lights out. I remember Kevin Kelly and Steve Carino left ringside. If you watch the tape, there's no commentary, not sanctioned. Yeah, so we've done at least one.
We need to do another one.
Yeah.
And the I hope I got this right. We've announced the anniversary pay-per-view.
We've announced the date. Yeah, Friday, March 26th. That's going to be coming from Baltimore, Maryland. It's going to be an exciting event. All the titles are on the line according to the preview. So we will. Whoever walks out of Shane Taylor versus Roosh as the champion will defend that on the pay-per-view. Whoever walks out the 6-man champs will walk out and defend that on the pay-per-view. Shane Taylor's in an interesting position because he could be defending 2 titles in one night like Gresham did back at Final Battle if he can cash in this week for the 6-man and next week for the world title on television.
So is it possible that Shane Taylor and Gresham...
Yes, it could be. Yeah, it could be. We could have 2 double champions. We could have 2 men defending 2 titles at the same time. Gresham and Lethal are defending the titles 2 weeks from now against the winner of the Briscoes versus Kenny King and Dragon Lee. A team that's teaming together, finding some chemistry. The Briscoes on the rocks, but they've said they put it back together this week.
Well, depending on the protocols and some other variables, there's a chance I might be in attendance.
Wow.
Joe Koff and got a hold of me through Gary Juster, and there's a few hoops to jump through. But if it's works for me and for the company and for the athletic commission, I'd love to be at the anniversary show. Because I was there last year, the one that didn't happen.
Right. We had a rousing game of craps at the beautiful Stratosphere, which was Lady Luck came. We weren't doing so well, and Lady Luck came, and suddenly we shot back up, and you, myself, and the great Todd Sinclair had a nice drive back. We drove you back to the airport in the pouring rain. It was raining in Vegas, which was strange.
Yes. Yeah, flooded.
Yeah.
Flooded. It was crazy.
Yeah, it was very odd. But I'm looking forward to being back. It was the first pay-per-view that had been canceled for Ring of Honor, Ring of Honor's history. But we're looking to come back on the 26th for 19th anniversary. Should be a heck of a card. And some great TV matches coming up. Like you said, the 6-man titles this coming week. The following week, Shane Taylor versus Roosh. And we will see Lethal and Gresham defend the tag titles against whoever wins this week between the Briscoes, Kenny King, and Dragon Lee.
A lot of talent.
A lot of talent. A lot of talent.
And we've been chugging along with the aforementioned 55 and 5, looking at the Parkhurst Canadian wrestling set, which you could see Monday through Friday on YouTube, thanks to the help of Bisan Creative and Graphic Design for making this possible and for you to have the whole set.
Right.
And it's also on adfreeshows.com.
Adfreeshows.com if you want to binge the audio. So if you are driving and you don't want to have the YouTube ad up, you just download it. Conrad's been very generous. The agreement we have, the videos of the poster of the week are free. I believe the 55 and 5 audio is free. All you have to do is sign up for the free tier of adfreeshows.com, and you get a little reminder when new content on the free tiers put up. But if you join the different tiers they have, the VIP tiers, you get us too, no matter what tier you're on. So it's good for us. We're getting some more exposure. Yeah. We're rubbing some elbows with JR, our buddy, with Tony Schiavone, my good friend from the Lehigh Valley, and Eric Bischoff's on there. Everybody's anybody.
Who's from the Lehigh Valley?
Tony Schiavone. You didn't know this?
No.
Yeah, he's from a little town up past the Poconos, or up near the Poconos. down past the Poconos, closer to Allentown. Yeah, if it's past the Poconos north, it's not in the Lehigh Valley anymore. But yeah,
he's never do that.
Yeah, he's a little bit past Lehighton. So
all right, and well, you know, the poster of the week's been a lot of fun. It's developed now into the posters of the week.
Right.
Do this glut of posters. Real quick, in the pop culture section, we mentioned, I know you still haven't watched it. I won't put you on the spot. The One Night in Miami.
Mm-hmm. Shane Taylor's watched it, though. He's been talking about it.
Yeah, you got to see it. So this sparked, it's about Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, and Sam Cooke. So myself and our producer, AJ, we watched a great Sam Cooke documentary. The title of it is, what was it? The deaths. It was like plural. The two deaths of Sam. Because there's different stories.
Right. It's his murder is still relatively unsolved. The case officially is solved, but there's still a lot of question marks.
Yeah, it's case closed kind of thing. The government might have been involved. Could it have been his association with Malcolm X? Might have had something to do with it. Could have been simply his love of women.
That's actually the story they taught us in high school, was that it was his extreme love of women. And
they taught that in high school?
They did. That was part of our history of music curriculum. Yeah.
You know, because he was found in this tube. You know, Sam Cooke's really interesting. Besides the great music he did, he was one of the early young black entrepreneurs. I mean, there was Berry Gordy, but Sam Cooke was a young man, and he was creating his own record label and had a number of artists. And by 1965, which I believe was the year of his death, 64 or 65.
I think it was 64.
He was Grammy Award winning, or top 10 artists, that's for sure. And to wind up with this, as the story went, this hooker in the Hacienda Motel.
The motel was not
$3. You see on the documentary, $3.
It's like that hotel in Coopersburg near the adult bookstore. Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Well, I mean, there's the one by the old, it used to be a Denny's anyway, by Southern Lehigh High School.
And the $3 wasn't even the short stay rate.
That was the long term. Oh my! The Executive Inn. That's no for free publicity, but that's the one I'm talking about.
So yeah, that's where he was found, shot naked, with 30 bullets in him.
Insane.
And check out the documentary. I'm sure there's more. So that was really interesting. I've been mentioning this for weeks. So first it was Led Zepplin, and then it was Peter Grant. And I was talking it up to Gary Juster, and he was very fascinated because, Peter Grant was a rock promoter. And Gary Juster is in the wrestling business, and he's done music.
He's done music, he's done concerts.
So he was really fascinated. So Gary has sent me some books over the years. So I sent Gary a copy of this Bring It On Home book.
Nice.
And the book was written in 2018. We mentioned in a previous episode, Peter Grant was in the wrestling business. He was a thespian also, as you like to say. He had bit parts. And got into the music business. He was, look after Gene Vincent. You've heard of Gene Vincent?
I have, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
He was an American, but he was popular in the UK. And then when Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry came over, look after these guys and make sure they're all right, make sure they get paid. And all this eventually led him to knowing, he knew everyone, but he knew the Yardbirds. The Yardbirds, boys and girls, if you don't know, had rotating members, but including Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page. And when the Yardbirds, it could have been their next album, but it became Led Zeppelin. Jimmy Page. So Peter Grant and Jimmy Page got this all together, and it's absolutely fascinating. He was one of the only men to challenge guys like Bill Graham and Ron Delsner. At the time, the promoters, it was 60-40.
Okay.
Bands got 60%, promoters got 40%. Well, Led Zeppelin won. You know, you can't demand anything, but that was a bit of a hit. But Led Zeppelin too,
right? With
Whole Lotta Love and the Lemon Song and Heartbreaker, Livin' Lovin' Maid. It was huge. It stayed on. It was like a Dark Side of the Moon style, where it stayed on the charts for like years.
Yeah.
So when it was a bona fide, you know, hey, this has been in the top 10 for 6 months.
Right.
He went to these promoters. Now, I don't know if he had success with what I'm going to tell you, but he tried to demand. Do you try to demand? Demand 90-10.
Whoa.
Yeah. And as you could see, if you behind was that poster, there was a Fillmore show. It was probably their first. There was a Fillmore show. I hope I didn't talk about this last week, but whatever. It was Iron Butterfly was the lead, and the opening act might have been, Chuck Berry.
Okay.
And Zeppelin was in the middle, and Peter Grant demanded that Zeppelin be the headliner to Bill Graham. And Bill Graham was like, what are you talking about? You know, but he would do crazy stuff like that. And if you watch The Song Remains the Same, which is the Zeppelin documentary, Peter Grant is in there, all 350, like takes that 401 pounds, no, like 300 some odd pounds, 6'3", you know, just ruled the roost. So really fascinating read. What else we got here in the pop culture world here?
So Gary sent me a great music recommendation, and there's a guy, Emmett Rhodes, who looks like Paul McCartney, sounds like Paul McCartney.
Okay.
Was around when Paul McCartney was around, but he produced his own music, and that rubbed people the wrong way. He couldn't really chart because he wasn't officially on a major record label, but he's just this amazing artist. So Gary just put me onto him. He's from 68 to 73, 74. And Emmett Rhodes, and I just learned he passed away just recently, just a few months ago.
Well, if he turned on to Emmett Rhodes, he must also try to be pushing one of his current favorites, the Kennedys.
The Kennedy? No, he hasn't.
Yeah, the Kennedys. Okay. There's a current band. They do, live streaming. You know, Gary's pretty hip when it comes to his music taste. He's on, I'm always thinking everything I'm listening to is 50 and 60 years old, as opposed to you or our producer.
Gary and I line up well, though. We're both big into Steve Forbert. We're both big into these folky rock things. I turned him on to Surfer Blood, which is a kind of a current band. That's kind of a poppy surfer band, and White Reaper, which I've sent you.
Yes.
It sounds a lot like Thin Lizzy with the big double guitars. And so Gary and I, we've exchanged some new ones, but he hit me with that. And then that led to Phil Seymour, which we were talking off the air, was the drummer for Phil Collins, which sounds like an oxymoron, but it's not.
It's a big role to fill.
Right. Yeah. Pun intended. Two Phils. Phil Seymour, Phil Collins, filling in on the drums.
Think about Phil Collins. I mean, with Peter Gabriel, if you listen and look at the old Genesis concerts, Phil Collins, sang in the background a little. But for Gabriel to leave the band, and I really like the early Genesis stuff. If you're a prog head like I am of the early prog, You know the names, but the Yeses and Floyds of the world. Genesis had some great stuff. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Trick of the Tail, and for Gabriel to leave and Phil Collins to say, "That's all right, I'll get up there and sing it."
Yeah.
And I went to Forest Hills Tennis Stadium in 1980.
Oh, wow.
For their tour, and they were the first. We've referenced this also. They were the first band, and they patented at the time to use the moving light.
Oh, yeah.
Instead of the old bulb gel, it's red. Bulb gel, it's green.
Yeah.
And you have 20 red lamps and 20. They had the moving lights that not only change colors but change direction.
Wow.
And so Phil Collins, he gets knocked around a little. He's pretty cool. We also watched. AJ and I had watched this the Ken Burns Jazz documentary.
Right.
So I pulled up this Louis Armstrong concert. It was from the early 60s.
Wow.
It was only like 50 minutes, 55 minutes, but it was awesome. It was like 6 pieces. It's Louis, a drummer, a stand-up bass player, a guy on trombone, a guy on clarinet, and he had a guest singer. You know, like during the show, he has a young lady comes out,
sure,
and it was fantastic. So trying to find some cool stuff, and it was recorded really well. You know, there's sound wise, it was excellent. So that's one last but not least, we were giving Gary a lot of props here, but he deserved it. Gary turned me on to this Frank Langella book. Now, Frank Langella is known for his performance in Dracula in the 80s. He's a New York stage actor. He was also, did you ever see the Frost Nixon movie? And he played Nixon.
Okay.
And I saw that on Broadway.
Oh, wow.
And so Frank Langella, it's called Dropping Names. And he just talks about these people in the course of his life. Mel Brooks, these are old actors, Kirk Douglas, and old producers and New York theater people that I really wasn't familiar with. And just tell stories about his experiences with them and just the way they spoke. And, you know, these actresses like Katharine Hepburn, right? And she would talk like, oh, that guy's a cocksucker and he's a good one, right? Stuff like that.
Oh, my goodness.
Right. And he's just got some great stories. And so as I was going through it, I called Gary. I said, yeah, this is good. I said, but a lot of these people, I said, are you familiar with them? Because it's a lot of New York theater. He goes, no, but they just make up great stories, you know, including Anne Bancroft was married to Mel Brooks. She's known for a lot of things, but she was in The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman. And like, he'll just tell a story like, you know, they're out drinking and they're friends. They knew each other for years. And Anne Bancroft says to him, like Langella says, I was at, what was it like with Dustin Hoffman? You know, he was a young man. And she's like, eh. And she was married to Mel Brooks, who's a nice Jewish man. Sure. She goes, he's like all those little Jews. Well, we did the nude scene in bed. The fucking kid, what kind of actor is he? He's got a hard on. You know, a good actor, you know, so. But yeah.
I never considered that.
Yes.
What you might do with,
Right. And there's all kinds of casting couch stuff.
Oh.
You know, the New York theater scene, there was a lot of
seediness.
There was seediness, and there was a lot of gay people involved. And you know, he started in the mid 60s, and just some really good stories. So the Dropping Names. Yeah. You know, people are listening to this. It's like I guarantee you, whatever age you are, unless you're really closed-minded, if you want to hear about characters, which we stress on Last Stop Penn Station, then it's a really good book. So
speaking of characters, we were in Hoboken.
Right.
We were talking about Mr. Kelly.
Talking about Frank Kelly, talking about redheads. And we went into detail as much as I could about Kelly's Pub and the characters around there. And I sent a link to, I mentioned in the last week's episode that I was hipped that if you go with Kelly to a day baseball game, because he couldn't make it to a night game. If you go to a day game, make sure, understand that he's going to leave you. And I'm like, now this was told to me by Brian McGordy. And Brian was, once again, he was a bartender there. He was a Hoboken fireman. He was an aspiring thespian also. He did some off-Broadway work and some others. And so he told me, listen, Kelly's going to split. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm going to the game with him. He goes, Cary, I've been going with him for years. This is what he does. And sure enough, that happened. You could hear about it on last week's episode. But where I'm going with this is I sent the episode to Brian. And a day or so went by and I didn't hear back from him. But then yesterday, I get this very nice text from him. And that says he really enjoyed the episode. That was, you nailed it. I thought, maybe I might have offended him or, bringing up the names, or you shouldn't have said that about whatever. But I said, let me call. So I called Brian and we spoke on the phone for a good 20, 30 minutes. And he said, I nailed it. And he also had some corrections for me. Oh, okay. I mentioned that Kelly bought the bar in 1960. That was incorrect. Well, maybe the location that was on Washington between 13th and 14th, he owned 4 bars between 1950 on. Okay. He worked in the railroad yards, and he was telling me the details of, Hoboken was just bustling, just like Bethlehem. It was bustling with industry. And he went into further detail explaining to me, he goes, I liked the, when you were telling about going to the ball game. He says, when that first happened to me, I go, well, I guess the first time you went with him. He goes, well, let me just give you more details. He goes, my father, Brian McGordy's father, was a good man, but he was a hardworking guy. And, Kelly was able to leave the bar and have someone tend bar. Sure. So Brian was it was like his uncle. Okay. So Kelly would get tickets. We're talking now my stories were like the late 80s. We're talking now, let's see, Brian's almost 70. So we're talking probably in the early 70s. Okay. So Brian was like, or maybe before that. Anyway, Brian was like 10, 11, 12 years old. So Kelly would take one of his sons, Brian, and another kid. They were all 10, 11, 12. Maybe the oldest one might be 13. Maybe the oldest one might have been 10. Yeah. And he would do it then. What? Brian said, he goes, this was good training, though, for me to learn how to get from Yankee Stadium back to Hoboken.
I'm assuming they took the green line just back to 34. I mean,
well, they would take
the 4, 5, 6,
the D train. Well, or you could take the 4, the above ground. Yeah. Or you take the D to 59th. Okay. Yeah. And the A to 42nd. Okay. Yeah. Or to 33rd. Grab the path. Yeah. Or the bus.
Leave it in the hands of 10-year-olds.
Right. So Brian was experiencing this from the age of 10. Wow. And I also had mentioned that after I moved out of Hoboken and I got my act cleaned up, we used to go to opening day And opening day would start by meeting at Kelly's. So there was, you got to Kelly's at 10 in the morning and you're drinking, right? And I wasn't drinking at that point. These guys drinking right out of the gate. You'd get on, the game was like, I think opening days in the old and even in the 90s was like 2:00.
Okay.
Or maybe whatever. But you would take the bus and take the train. So Brian said to me, his son, Dylan, who attended, who's now 30, who attended Ring of Honor with Brian back at the Hammerstein a number of years ago. He said Dylan would go with him when he was a little kid. I remember Dylan. And so Dylan says to Brian, his father, at one point, I know how to go to Yankee Stadium by myself. He might have been like 8 or 9 years old. And Brian's like, oh, how would you do that? He goes, well, first you go to Kelly's for 2 hours. And then you take that bus. And then the A train.
Oh my goodness.
But the point was you go to Kelly's for a couple hours. And it was really good talking to him. I left out a couple of Kelly's stories. One of them's a bit of a downer. But whatever, they're just classics. We mentioned previously when we were talking about the Odd Jobs episode, Pioneer Homes with the number.
Yeah.
Playing
the number and the number runners. And
Right. And I mentioned Fellatio Medina's. Yes. Fellatio, my downstairs neighbor, poor Fellatio Medina. Oh, Dustin reminded me, my room, I took Dustin in. And Dustin, I was a degenerate. I used to call him the world's youngest degenerate. And Dustin wouldn't tell me this stuff. He would lose his keys and I wouldn't be there. I was at wherever I was. And so what would Dustin do? He would bang on Fellatio Medina's window.
Huh.
It's like 3 in. Oh. And poor Fellatio Medina, she was such a nice lady. She'd be like, she could open the door, but he still didn't have the key to the apartment.
Sure.
But he could climb the fire escape.
Oh, wow.
To get in through the window.
Oh,
so poor Fellatio, but her son was the numbers runner.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Kelly's, there was a guy there, Chubby.
So that's mean, but it's a little less mean than some of the other nicknames. So
he was, if you were I asked this question, if you were a very heavy person,
sure,
would you rather be called Chubby, Tubby, or Fatso?
Yeah, I gotta go with Chubby. Yeah.
Chubby didn't mind. Well, Chubby was he was Puerto Rican, and he hung out at Kelly's, and there was a little Spanish-American club around the corner, and Chubby sold some party favors, and he would take the number, but not in Kelly's, because Kelly's took the number.
Oh, really?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
And like that was like a service they provided. Just like I was talking about the Blarney Rock in the city, how they would cash the checks.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly's, you could play the number. And the question would be, what's in it for Kelly's?
Yeah.
Well, if a number would hit, Kelly's was dealing with the old school Hoboken businessmen.
Gotcha.
Okay?
Yeah.
And who were around since pre-Frank Sinatra.
Gotcha.
Those guys.
Before Capital Wrestling.
Yes. Yeah. Right. And so the businessmen would compensate whoever took the number by giving them a percentage. And strangely enough, it was on a percentage when someone would win.
Oh.
Not when they... So you put... I'm not exactly sure of how it worked out, but I'm sure of this one day.
Mm-hmm.
I go into Kelly's, and it was during the day. And Mrs. Kelly, Dotsy was there from doing the kitchen from like 10 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. And Patty, the daughter, one of the daughters was working. And I come in and Frank was, I don't even know if Frank was there. But I go in there and Patty's in the kitchen. There weren't a lot of people in there. And I hear this crying, like weeping. And I go around like to where the kitchen, to where the door was. The same door where Mrs. Kelly would say, "Come here, kid," and slide me a $20 bill. And just because she was just so nice. So, sometimes, you know, I just wanted you to have it. And Patty's crying and Mrs. Kelly's in there. I think Frank was there. And I'm like, what's the matter? Well, someone died, you know, something's up. And Kelly must have been there. Kelly's like, don't worry about it, kid. Well, when things settled down, I found out that somebody hit the number, and it wasn't just like a 50 cent or like $1 would pay 500.
Right.
And that's why people played the old school number, because the pick 3 PA pay 200 something. It was $500.
Wow.
And so what happened was one of their customers who would faithfully, I remember I used to play 574. 574, because it was a dress at some point. Never hit, except the day I didn't play it. Well, this guy was a faithful customer, and he would play like $5 on a number, and you could play it straight and boxed, and he'd play it like for the week. In other words, it was a steady, let's just say the number was 574. He played it all the time. Well, and he played it a $5 bet, which was, you know, a $2,500 payoff. Well, the number came in.
Wow.
And the businessmen said, "You didn't give us that number yesterday." Right. And that's why Patty was in tears. And Mrs. Kelly, who was more composed, was, you know, and because they had to pay they paid the guy. Yeah. And these other guys, you know, that was really a shitty, it wasn't that they forgot, you know. I'm surprised but that's the way it went down. And Brian said that Brian told me it happened more than once.
Really? Oh, yeah.
And so that was a sad day. But, you know, Kelly got real sick, and he was diagnosed terminally ill, some terrible cancer, and he was basically sent home. There was nothing they can do except give him medication. And he maybe had like, you know, a month or 6 weeks, just keep him comfortable. And he didn't want to go to any kind of facility. They lived in Weehawken.
Okay.
So it was the springtime, and Kelly wasn't, he was having a hard time walking, you know, and he was starting to make a little comeback, like 2-3 weeks into it. Brian told me this story. He goes, he was sitting out on the front steps, and he didn't smoke. And one day, when he felt that he could stand and walk, he said to Patty, or one of the kids, "Take me to the bar." And they're like, "Dad, you know, take me to the bar." And suddenly Kelly came to the bar. Now, in the interim, when they were told he only has 2 weeks to 6 weeks, the family went out. He had clothes, but they bought a new suit.
Oh.
They didn't tell him.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they bought a new suit.
Yeah, I just put that together.
Right. So Kelly's coming to the bar every day. But instead of drinking the beer and then scotch.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's just drinking red wine. This is Brian telling me the story.
Okay.
And now he's coming there. It's like he came the first day. Now it's like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Brian said after about a month, Kelly says, Jesus, I never would have, if I knew I could have just drank red wine, I'd have been drinking red wine the whole time. So he baffled science.
Wow.
And I believe it was a relative of Brian or someone there was a marriage coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And there was there was no way that Kelly was going to be able to attend this wedding. He was given like 6 weeks to live. And it'd been now it's into the fourth month. And so Brian says, so we're at the wedding and Kelly's dancing, slow dancing with one of his daughters.
Aww. And
I'm dancing with Dotsie, that's his wife.
Yeah.
And Dotsie says to me, Jesus Christ, if we knew it was going to make it, and they love each other.
Yeah.
We don't wait. Why'd we have to buy the suit? He was wearing that suit at the wedding. So yeah.
That's a nice twist.
Yeah. Yeah. There's not, they don't make him like him anymore.
Yeah.
They just don't make him like him anymore.
Well, let's talk about Hoboken a little bit too. When you were there, you said you started to get cleaned up, started to get a little sober.
Towards the end.
In terms of music, what were you listening to? Were you still going to as many concerts? Were you hustling?
Well, that's when I was straight ticket scalping.
Okay.
And so when I came back from New Orleans, we're talking 86, and I was teamed up with Freddie the Weeper, and it wasn't until, I wish I had the dates more precise, but it wasn't until late 87 or early 88 where I was able to get that apartment from Joan Torino, the lady, the old stripper that owned Redheads. And she was, so I had the apartment. Now I'm a full-time, a Hoboken. I was, as opposed to couch surfing or crash, my parents had moved, staying here, staying there, or staying at Hard Boiled Harry's. I had my own place. Mm-hmm. And so I was in the city every day, and I would go to basically whatever was, what was I listened to what I always listened to. But, the Kinks are playing the Beacon. And I remember going to the Kinks with Baby Dumpling.
Okay.
Or Neil Young's at the Garden with Crazy Horse.
Yeah.
Go to that. Or, the Dead were doing their 10, 12 shows. I'd go to some of them.
Right.
And it was so convenient because just to get home, you just zipped on the PATH train. Mm-hmm. And there were two bus lines. There was the New Jersey Transit had a little bus, but then there was a discount bus.
Okay.
And it was no relation to the theater where Ralph the Mummy spent the 8 days the proper name was the Big Apple All Night Triple X Cinema and Kung Fu, which was nicknamed the Big Nipple.
Right.
So there was suddenly another bus line in Hoboken.
Really?
It was the red apple, so that was the red. We would take the red nipple.
Okay.
So the New Jersey Transit bus might have been $1, $1.25. The red nipple was 50 cents.
Wow.
It was like these broken down buses. But
sort of like the Chinatown buses now
exactly,
that take you New York to Philly.
Like, how do they afford for $10? How do they afford, to do
How
it?
do they run it? Yeah.
But yeah, so I lived at 118 Jefferson Street, and I was talking to Dustin about it, and I had this rule. As messed up as we were, and as wild, and the afternights after hours
Was
clubs.
stroking by Clarence Carter.
Once we get back, especially him, because he was only like 19. I mean, not that I was so prim and proper. I said, but when we come to no messing around in Hoboken. You want to buy drugs, do drugs, this, that, do it in New York City. And when you come to Hoboken, that stuff's over. I mean, the apartment was it was its own country.
Okay.
But, and I told Dustin, because the drinking age was 21.
Right.
Don't come into Redheads.
Okay.
Because it
puts you in a bad spot.
Right. Redheads and Kelly's. I said, I don't, they were serving him in the city. They didn't card you, and all these shitholes on 8th Avenue, the full moon, and
a lot of them are still there.
they just didn't card you. So naturally, one night I'm in Redheads, and I told you they had those 4 steps going down.
Yeah.
And he comes in, right? And I didn't say nothing to him. But when we left, I'm like, what are you doing? They didn't card him because he was a friend of mine. So there's 100 bars within a square mile.
Yeah.
This is the 2 places I tell you not to go.
Yeah.
But so where I lived at 118 Jefferson, right at the corner, there was a luncheonette. And it was the guy that ran the place. He ran for mayor.
Okay.
It was a highly unlikely candidate. I'm trying to compare him. I'm trying to come up with a comparison.
If I ran for mayor in Allentown.
Oh, no. You'd be highbrow.
Okay. Right.
This was just a local guy, Italian.
Wasn't well connected.
No. Yeah. But he just felt like, I've been living in Hoboken. Because at the time, the locals of Hoboken, with this gentrification, were getting pushed out.
Gotcha.
And
he's taking a stand.
Yeah. He tried to run for mayor. It was an unsuccessful bid. And he had a son. And the guy, the mayor and his wife who ran, this is like a breakfast lunch place.
Right.
And the guy who was the mayor told me, be careful of my son. My son's trouble.
Huh.
Right? Well, shit. I mean, I'm on the streets. I'm trouble. And I remember the guy was I don't know if he was a functioning addict, but he was an addict. And I remember one time we wanted the Hoboken Hilton when it was cold. I mean, this thing was built in like 1897. And Joan Chirino wasn't real generous with the heat.
Right.
Fellatio Medina couldn't turn some kind of crank. And, you had to have the space heaters.
Right.
And then when it got hot.
Oh, I bet it was even worse.
Right.
Yeah.
So made some money at some show. Iron Maiden played, and it happened to be a big ticket. I got some lucky deals, and I remember going for breakfast and mentioning about getting an air conditioner, and I was so naive. The mayor's son says, "I know a good place." like I couldn't go, You
could go to Sears or H.H.
Right. I think one of the problems was I was licenseless at the time.
So you need the ride.
Right.
Yeah.
So he got us some air. We bought some air conditioner, or I'm sure we double paid.
Yeah.
Or, it was $300, but it should have been $150. Whatever. It wasn't the end of the world. Another strange thing, there was good eating spots all over Hoboken, too. It's still there. There's a place called Leo's. I'd love to go back there. Yeah. And it was a bar and a restaurant, and they had that. didn't want to compare it to Mod Pizza.
Sure.
You know, that size, personal pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah, Leo's had the greatest pizza.
Wow.
And other really good dishes. And old man Leo, he was tending bar, as opposed to Kelly. Yeah, he'd have a little wine, but he was a real gentleman. I remember his son-in-law got involved in the place, and nobody liked the son-in-law, but it was a really, it was one, and it was like just a block and a half, but it was the kind of place where I could go and I'd be like, hey, Leo, listen, I don't have any money today. I'll pay, and he was, don't worry about it, my boy. And I would pay him eventually, but they would do that. Same at the mayor's place. Like you could run tabs.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
But it was just the culture. You could run tabs.
Last place I did that was at a bagel cart.
There you go.
Yeah. And that would be they're right all along NYU's campus. I mean, there's one that was always there on West 4th Street. Then there's one in Astor Place, Cooper Union, right there. And
now, knowing you, I can't imagine you requesting credit.
When so at the time, that was right when the ATM machine started to be $3, $4 a shot. And when you only have 100 in there at a time, I just waited until I had a 20 and went back. But yeah, I was a little different when I was 18, 19 years old.
So did you like know that this service was available?
No.
Or did you say to the guy,
hey, I forgot my wallet. It was legitimate. Hey, I forgot my wallet. Can I get you tomorrow? And that was,
But he saw you like every day.
Every day, I get a Snapple and a bagel and walk my way off to the Brown Building or.
So that was just a one-time thing.
A couple times. Let me slide and run up a tab.
Yeah, it's interesting. But running tabs was, it's just the way business was done back then. Another very strange thing happened. 118 Jefferson. It was a Saturday, and it was good weather. Might have been during the time when I cleaned up my act, and I was going to go down to the mayor. It wasn't the morning. It was maybe 1 p.m. Now the neighborhood was changing, and there were a lot of yuppie types, and there was a lot of Latin Americans, that had been living there for years, and old school Hoboken white people that had been living there for years, and black people, mixed neighborhood. But the yuppies were coming.
Yeah.
And I go out to go to the mayor's, and I look down the block. Like Jefferson Street was about, you got the river, you got Washington Street with all the businesses, was about 7 blocks deep.
Okay.
So it wasn't, it was quiet. So on an average day, I'd walk out the door, and there's not like a busy sidewalk. There might be a person here or there, or sometimes no one.
Sure.
So I go out the door, and I'm like, it's like a mirage. Am I seeing things? There was a wrestling ring.
What?
The Jefferson Street was closed off.
Okay.
2nd Street was the next block that would lead up towards where the path is. 1st, 2nd. Once again, Kelly's was 14th. So I was either between 1st and 2nd or 2nd and 3rd, whatever it was. I'm going down. I look out, and they had cones set up. It was like a street fair.
Wow.
And it was and there's a wrestling ring. And it was primarily the neighborhood Latinos.
Okay.
And there was some social clubs there.
Cool.
And I'm like, wow. So I go, and I'm like, practically run down the street. And I'm watching, and there's these all Latin American wrestlers weren't very good.
Okay.
The ring was beat up. And I remember saying to one of those guys, I'm like, hey, I'm a big wrestling fan. Who do you guys work with? And the guy just like said, WCW or something, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, as if, and then I spoke to another one of them. It was some small wrestling organization out of like Patterson or Jersey City.
Yeah.
And as part of the street fair, they had wrestling. And I thought this was like the greatest thing.
Yeah.
But there was no notice that it was coming. I just walked out and there's wrestling on my street.
That happened to me in Allentown.
Really?
Yeah, they run Sports Fest down at Cedar Beach.
Oh, yeah. I went one time when
The Rock was there a couple times.
And Foley, too.
Foley was there once, yeah. I just must have blanked on the date. I went down with a couple of my buddies and we saw Batista before Batista was a thing. And we saw Don Morocco. And
well, the Samoans must have been.
Yeah. So, Samu in particular, Alpha and Samu in particular would run those. But I usually would see the posters at the grocery store. They used to be real good about putting the posters up and the notices up. I must have just not seen it. I drove down with my buddies and, hey, there's The Rock. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. So it's always incredible when that stuff happens. I mean, you said it was kind of luchadors? I have so many questions now.
No, it was American style pro wrestling.
Yeah.
They weren't trying to do lucha libre.
Yeah.
But it was, primarily
Latino wrestlers.
Yeah, Latino wrestlers, and they weren't big guys, and I kept wanting. I couldn't get more information. I wanted to ask questions, but I was sort of being ignored. So I just took it for what it was. I mean, if they're going to be wrestling on my block, where else can I see this?
Sure.
Because I want to see wrestling wherever I can see it.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, and the first apartment door or the first building. So I'm at 118 Jefferson, which is about the sixth building. So if you went to the corner, that first corner apartment, somebody in there was supplying their apartment as the dressing room.
Really?
Because that's where the guys were coming. That's where they were coming in and out of.
Oh, well, at least Samu and Alpha had a nice tent. I remember as the entranceway at beautiful Cedar Beach in Allentown, Pennsylvania. But Hoboken, man, you had everything. You had it all. You had Kelly's. You had pop-up wrestling.
Pop-up wrestling. There was a lot of good food.
The mayor.
And the mayor. And the town was good to me. I hated when we'll get, where are we at here?
We're about an hour in.
All right. Well, when we come back, we still have a boatload of good stories within the Hoboken period. Yeah. Because that's the heart of my ticket scalping with all the ticket scalping characters. Mm-hmm. But this should really lead into me leaving Hoboken. Okay. And how that happened. And it was it didn't seem good. But the events that took place that moved me out to Lehigh Valley area. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting because when I left and moved out here, it was like, damn, I'm like, I was, 6 minutes and I was on Christopher Street on the Path Station. Yeah. Or 14 minutes on by the Garden. Mm-hmm. Now I'm out, in Pennsylvania, but there was good reason for it. And, everything has I'm not always one of these, it was meant to be kind of things, but mm-hmm. It's just part of the story. So maybe we'll pick up on that and we'll go and tell a story about how I left Hoboken and how I got out here. And then we'll jump back into the characters and the denizens of Penn Station.
Oh, that sounds great. I'd love to hear it. It reminds me a lot of the movie My Blue Heaven, the way you described it, where Steve Martin goes into the witness protection program, goes to San Diego, and he absolutely hates it. Thinks he's going to hate it, and then he turns out he really enjoys it out there. So it's away from all the hustle and bustle in New York. It's based on the same movie Goodfellas, the same screenplay Goodfellas is written on.
I'll have to watch it.
Yeah, it's cute. It's funny. Rick Moranis is in it.
Once I got out here, I realized it wasn't that far.
Right.
But I definitely, and you could relate to this, being an NYU guy.
Yeah.
You miss the city.
You do.
You know, and even though I had cleaned up, I still loved going to the shows.
Mm-hmm.
I still loved other activities that were readily available.
The kung fu, right? The kung fu
that were readily available in Manhattan, and turned out they were readily available here too. So
I told you, the Executive Inn down on Cooper.
So we'll get into that.
Yeah, that'll be a lot of fun next week. And between now and then, if you haven't already, please check out the poster of the week on adfreeshows.com. That's free every week. We have a link to it on my YouTube page as well, where you can see each new episode on the playlist. It's easy to find there. And don't forget, 55 and 5 available every weekday. We're still looking for information on Ken Colley, the ghost. And Cary, we got a real interesting one coming up next Friday. It's the inverse. It's a man that we've seen a lot of newspaper articles on. He's got matches galore on YouTube, but nobody's ever written about him in a wrestling sense. So,
well, maybe when we come back next week, we'll have some more.
Maybe we'll have a Ken Colley update.
Ken Colley update and an update on this other strange 55 and 5 participant. And guess what? We finally. Thank you. We broke 80.
Yeah.
We have 81 5-star. I don't know if they're all 5-star, but we have 81 5-star reviews, and
we're down under 10 micro brawlers.
Unbelievable.
We're gonna sell them all and give some money to Bradbury Sullivan. So it's what a blessed series of events.
Yes.
It's Dan. I gotta thank Danhausen because people went and bought his micro brawler. He sold out in less than a day. And with it, for some reason, they bought mine with it. We must make a great team, me and Danhausen.
Why not?
So, there you have it. So it's been a lot of fun. We're going to thank AJ, our producer. We're going to thank Eric from Discover Pro Wrestling.
Yes. And I'm going to put the pressure on you.
Okay.
And it's not like I know you're busy with the kids and the jobs and Sarah and everything else, but you got to at least watch One Night in Miami.
All right. I will do it. That's a promise. I will watch it before we reconvene.
So then we can talk a little more about Sam Cooke and Ali and everyone else, but you'll really enjoy it.
Oh, it sounds good. Thank you, everybody, for listening this week. It's been a really fun episode once again. We return next week as Cary ventures from Hoboken to the Lehigh Valley. Talk to you then.
For listening to Last Stop Penn Station podcast. Rate, review, like, subscribe, and share on your favorite platform. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or at laststoppennstation.com.